What you working on, Mr. Goblin?
I'm just doing a little toy sculpting.
Oh, well, it's time to stop.
Why's that?
Because Clarence has a surprise for you.
You do? Well, what is it?
Well, you were taking too long making Clarence's Clarence toy. So Clarence took matters into his own hands.
Okay, we talked about this. I told you, producing your own SOFUBI takes time. You need to have patience.
No, that is incorrect. Clarence does not need patience because Clarence has magic.
Clarence, what did you do?
No, nothing. Just expedited the process. The toy is now complete. Boom! Look at that. Perfection. Yes, indeed, indeed.
Wow, you really did it, huh? Let me see that. Okay. Articulation's a little tight.
What do you mean?
Well, this head, you can barely turn it. The joint feels locked or something. Which way did you position the joint? Going up into the neck or down to the chest cavity where the arm joints are?
Clarence doesn't know the answers to these technical questions. It's magic.
All right.
What is it?
Nothing. It's a very charming toy.
You think Clarence cheated with magic, don't you?
I don't think you cheated. I just think that certain aspects of the production may have been rushed by using magic.
You don't like the staff, do you?
I didn't say that.
You think it's wonky?
It's just a little lopsided. I think it's still really cute.
Cute? You think the staff is cute? The Clarence doesn't even know what you're talking about. What staff? There is no staff.
Clarence, you're doing that thing again.
What thing?
Well, your ego is overreacting just a bit and generating negative emotions that are kind of taking over the conversation.
But you said the joints were stupid.
No, I was just trying to give you some constructive criticism.
Oh, so you don't hate it?
Of course not. But it doesn't matter what I think. How do you feel about it?
Well, Clarence sees it's not perfect, but it's Clarence's, and he likes it.
Well, good. That's all that matters. I actually think it's delightful, and I would love to have one.
Well, you can't, because Clarence only made one, and it belongs to Clarence.
You only made one? Well, don't you want to make more?
Well, of course, but magic uses a lot of energy, and Clarence is very tired.
Well, I don't mind helping you out. How about this? You make some more blanks, and I'll paint them for you.
All right, but don't paint them like this one. It's pretty bad. Clarence can see.
I can work on it.
Okay. Magic toy! It's like monsoon ruler of the ocean, just like...
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a good bit.
Yes, well, nap time.
Well, looks like it's time for me to hold up my end of the bargain. Let's head over to the paint cave.
Yeah, you do that.
Okay, so this figure that Clarence made here is what we call a test paint. Now, since Clarence asked me to improve upon this, we need to now make ourselves a paint master. A paint master is a prototype that serves as a detailed guide that will show me how each color needs to be sprayed on the final run of figures. And making a paint master also kind of serves as another test in order to figure out the proper workflow, like which colors are applied in what order to make the process the most efficient and streamlined as possible, you know? So the first thing we need to do is color match this test paint. It looks like the skin is the color of the vinyl, so that simplifies things, which is great. For the hair, I think we should use our tangerine color, which we just recently released. And then I'm seeing some orange directional sprays at the edges there. For the clothes, purple and periwinkle will do the trick. And then we've got some white accents on the hat brim and bracelets. Lastly, we'll use a touch of medium flesh on the nose And then when we're all finished painting him, we will insert some green 6mm safety eyes and cut some custom capes out of some 1mm thick purple acrylic felt. All right, so we're using my trusty Iwata Eclipse HPCS airbrush today with a 0.35mm nozzle with the air pressure at about 15 psi. Here's our vinyl, all cleaned and ready to go to be made into our paint master. And now we just need to decide which colors to do first. Clarence has a lot of hair, so it makes sense to start with our base hair color, which is tangerine. And while we've got it loaded up in the airbrush, we'll just spray down every part that needs that particular color. So we've got the head, and then next, the body, and then once we get that covered, we'll spray some on both of the arms. Yeah. And then we'll move on to the next color, which I changed my mind on. Instead of orange, I'm going to mix up a deeper custom orange that will provide better contrast on the hair. I'm mixing the orange with a little bit of red to make what I'm calling blood orange. I think this will look better than just regular orange for these directional undersprays. It's still subtle, which is what I want, but it gives that tangerine more of a pop to have that darker orange in the shadows. And I'm going very lightly with this blood orange, just a gentle pull on the trigger, and making sure to keep the airbrush at an angle of about 130 to 150 degrees from the high points of where the tangerine is laying. That way the blood orange will catch the recessed areas of the sculpt, allowing those directional shadows to show. You see? And now it's time to move on to clothing. We got to decide whether to start with purple, periwinkle, or white. And I'm leaning towards white because of the direction that it needs to be sprayed. You see, in order to get good coverage on the mushroom gills of that hat, we got to spray upwards towards the cap. So there's going to be a lot of white overspray up there. And if we painted the purples first, well, and then we sprayed the white, well, you know, we'd get a lot of that overspray on our purples, right? So we'd have to respray the purple all over again. We don't want that. We got to keep things streamlined here. We're going to work with the sculpt, not against it. So the next logical step is to paint the darker color of the two variations of purple we have so that we can easily do a directional top spray of the periwinkle afterwards to create some highlights. If we tried to do what we did with the hair and start with a lighter color, doing a directional underspray with the darker color after, that would be really tricky because of the protruding areas towards the bottom of the sculpt, preventing us from being able to spray upwards easily. The brim of the hat, the feet, those little protruding areas would make it difficult to get a wide enough angle in order to have an effective directional spray. Does that make sense? I hope so. Doing it this way is just going to make the whole process much smoother once we get into doing the complete run, you know, and doing these over and over and over again. We want to make this real streamlined. So next up, the nose. And we're just going to very lightly and carefully spray a little medium flesh on that nose. It takes a delicate touch with the airbrush to spray an area that small without using a paint mask, but it's doable with practice. And now we need to prepare some brushable white by mixing a little bit of vinyl thinner into the white concentrate. We can use this on Clarence's pearly little bracelets. And you know, because of the rounded nature of the pearls, the application is a little clumsy, I'm noticing. So we might rethink that later. But let's move on to the purple toenails. We all know Clarence likes to paint his nails. His fingers are a little too small for nail details, but this purple will look nice on the toes. Yeah, that's cute. This kind of miniature tapping brush work you're seeing requires that you thin your paint to just the right consistency. I don't have a set ratio I use for this. I just kind of feel it out. Basically, my general rule of thumb is that if you're getting those little stringy webs where the paint doesn't just roll off the brush and instead it sticks and pulls as you try to apply the color, then your paint is too thick and you need to mix in a little more thinner. So yeah, now that the paint is finished, we need to let it cure for at least 24 hours before assembling. Or else you could get paint transfer when trying to heat up and assemble the pieces. You know, that can happen. We're using a heat gun on the head to start with so that we can get the eyes pushed in more easily. Yeah, he's coming to life now, isn't he? And then while the vinyl is still warm and soft, we will take the hat and we'll insert the hat joint. And next, we'll heat up his torso, because that's where all the holes are. And SOFUBI uses the pivot joint system. So you got the mushroom peg and the hole. You want to heat up the hole so that the vinyl softens and allows for the rigid mushroom peg to insert more easily. And then when the vinyl cools, it rehardens and locks that peg into the joint. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah. And there we have it. Just stick those legs in and our paint master is complete. I think that's a pretty decent upgrade from the test paint. So now we're just going to write master on the bottom of the foot, because that's what it is, the paint master, that we can now reference in order to more easily carry out an entire run based on this special little guy. And believe it or not, just as I finished this guy, it started raining. But the sun kept shining. So you know what that means. We got blessed with a beautiful rainbow break. Nothing like a good rainbow break. And a pretty one too. So back to it. Time to paint a whole mess of these buddies. And if you've watched any of my paint videos before, y'all know how I like to do a quick solvent bath with a makeup sponge and some vinyl thinner in order to open up that vinyl substrate and excite the molecules to form a chemical bond with the paint. You don't absolutely have to do this if your vinyl is clean, but it does help to make things more durable and playable. And who knows, somebody might want to take this toy with them on a hike somewhere. So here we go, tangerine all over again. Things are about to get very repetitive. Painting a run of toys all the same color can be challenging for some people. It's all about your headspace though. If you're in the kind of headspace where you're obsessing over the end result, like how many you can get made and how much you're going to sell them for and whether people will buy it and who will like it and who won't, all that incessant future thinking will quickly drain you of the energy you need in order to get the job done with ease. And the quicker you get drained of your energy, the more grueling of an experience you've made for yourself. Trust me, I know, I've been there. Every artist has. And especially us toy makers, I think, can easily fall into this mindset of overthinking the success of something. But as toy makers who have the ability to easily create handmade art through this repetitive and dependable process that I'm showing you here right now, we have a unique opportunity to practice a certain kind of mindfulness that can greatly benefit our work and ourselves. And that practice is just staying focused and present, right? We're painting the heads tangerine. And now we're pouring the tangerine back into the bottle from whence it came. And we're going to start with the blood orange. That's all we're doing. We're paying attention to the pressure our fingers putting on the trigger, the flow of the paint out of the nozzle, the subtle but swift movements of our hand, which keeps the paint from pooling on the figure. We're focusing on all the little areas that might have been missed or possibly need a little touch up. What we're trying not to do is to think about other things. We don't need to do that. The goblin in our head wants us to think that we need to do that. It wants us to think that every single little thought that comes through our brains must be so important that we have to divert our attention from what is truly important, which is this present moment of creation, to what it wants us to think is important. And what is that exactly? Why do we do that to ourselves? Whenever we have an opportunity to focus on a simple, repetitive task, why do we as humans tend to turn on the autopilot so that we can then clutter up our minds with all this foolish overthinking? Why? Well, it's that ego, right? It's always looking for something else to add to itself, to try and make itself feel more real, more complete. It looks to the future for that sense of completion. But when we're always looking to the future for completion, we can never feel that sense of wholeness that we're looking for, because the future never comes. Our brains get addicted to thinking about the outcome it wants to try and achieve, and so everything we do just becomes this means to an end. There's no more joy in the doing when we think like that, you know? What happens then is that our brains start getting filled up with all these pointless thoughts like, what will people think? How can I make sure that people will buy this? Will it sell fast enough so that I can tell everyone that it's sold out? Will doing that make me look cool? If not, how can I make sure this work gets me noticed? Oof. I'll tell you what, those thoughts are no fun. And then the silliest question of them all that every artist at some point inevitably thinks, will I ever break through? Will I ever make it? But here's the truth, dude. You're making it as long as you're making it, you know? Just make the art and be totally present with the making of the art. Everything else related to the art is secondary. Our art deserves at least that. When we're in the process of creation, that creation deserves our complete attention. And when we give more of that attention to the act of creation than to a possible future outcome that we want to try and accomplish through that act of creation, that's when we start to break those bad habits of the ego, the little goblin. And once we've done that, our painting or sculpting or writing, whatever we're doing, not only becomes a lot more efficient, but also much more enjoyable and fulfilling too. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, you know? When we make a conscious effort to ignore those little voices in our minds, the more we do that, the more we start to recognize that the voice in our head is just a voice. It's not us. It wants us to think that it is because, again, that makes it feel more in control. And I know this next bit might sound a little woo-woo to some of y'all, but think about this. The real you and the real me isn't the thinker. It's the one that is aware of the thinking. You know, when we catch ourselves overthinking foolish thoughts, who catches that? Who is that? That awareness is who we really are. And knowing that, whew, man, such a weight is lifted, you know? When we know that simple truth, that we are not the little thinker, we are the one that is aware of the thinker, we can forgive ourselves more easily for those silly little thoughts, right? Kind of like we forgive a screaming baby on a plane, or when our dog barks incessantly at the mailman. It's definitely not pleasant, but it's neither good nor bad. It just is. These things happen. Not a big deal. It will pass. So, in other words, it's okay if we get lost in the thought of success for a minute, or the fear of failure. But once we catch ourselves doing that, and we realize that the thought doesn't actually serve us in the present moment, we can drop it and focus on what's truly important. Painting the orange on these little arms right now, or whatever it is that you're doing, you know, watching this video, or maybe you're working on an art project of your own. That's what you're doing, and that's all you're doing, and that's all that matters right here and right now. All the other stuff will be dealt with when the time comes for it to be dealt with. Yeah. Look at all these arms. Okay, so as I said earlier when we were painting the Paint Master, this little bracelet is kind of clumsy to paint this way. Those little pearls slow the brush down, so to speak. And doing it again now, it just doesn't feel right to paint them this way. I don't know. I'm not feeling it. We got to wipe this off with some thinner and a makeup sponge and try again. My idea is to lightly spray some purple over that bracelet. And this purple might be too dark, but we're going to try it here. Yeah. See, now I've got a darker base to dot those white pearls over, and dotting the tops of those little pearl shapes is much smoother and quicker than trying to brush down the whole thing. Yeah. Okay, so that might be a little too dark of a purple, actually. That high contrast might just be a tad too distracting. So let's try bringing in the lighter of the purples that we've been using, the periwinkle. Yeah, I'm feeling this a little more. The contrast is a little more subtle. Now that the values are just a little closer to each other, there's still some nice enough contrast between the white and that periwinkle, but not too much. I like it. That's what we're gonna do. Yeah. And you see that paint not wanting to come out of the airbrush? That's what you call tip dry. This is something that can happen when you're spraying at really low air pressures, like the 10 psi I'm doing here. All we have to do is thin the paint down a little more. We'll just add a little touch of vinyl thinner to this, mix it in well, and spray it through for a few seconds before getting back to it. Just try and get out that thick stuff and so we can get down to the thin. And that will help us prevent any further tip dry from clogging up the works. Much smoother, yeah. We can now resume painting all these little bracelets, one pearl at a time. And these bracelets, you know, I could have done these differently. A lot of other painters might have wanted to use masking putty or masking tape or even make a little DIY paint mask for areas like that. And that's definitely one way to do it. Every once in a while, I'll mask something off that really needs it, but I don't personally enjoy the type of work that goes into masking things, so I tend to just freehand everything with a combination of airbrushing and hand painting. It's more fun for me that way. And besides, paint masking is for artists who want crisp edges, right? They want precision. They want it to be all crispy and perfect. But I'm not really a crispy kind of guy. I do think of myself as a meticulously detailed artist, but in a different kind of way. More of a thoughtfully detailed artist, if that makes sense, than a precisely detailed artist. I don't even know if that makes sense to me. I just like for my art to reflect who I am. We'll say that. And I'm more of a wabi-sabi kind of guy. I'm not perfect. I do like to dress nice, but I'm a little wonky too. I've got one eyebrow that curves around and grows wild. I've got weird hairs that grow further down my left shoulder than they do on my right. I don't know. I'm kind of soft around the edges, you know? And so if the colors on my toys are also a little soft around the edges, I'm okay with that. I don't need all my colors to be perfectly sequestered from one another. I don't mind a little overspray. If a little bit of the purple of the pants blends over onto the feet here, seeing that just reminds me of how everything is connected anyway. You know what I mean? Like in a way, we're all kind of blending in with each other all the time. You might not see it, but whether you see it or not, the solidity of matter is just an illusion. All right? And yeah, that's just something I believe. You might not believe that, but here's some food for thought. Some real science for you here to back this thought of mine up. Every time we take in a breath, we're taking in atoms that have been moving around throughout the atmosphere for thousands of years. And because of the insane number of molecules involved here, it is extremely likely that we are breathing in molecules of air that were at one point in time inside the lungs of every other human, animal, plant who has ever lived. And it's not just our air. That same molecular process occurs with our water, our food, and even our entire body. Like the atoms in our body are being replaced always, as I'm speaking to you here. I think the number is like 80 or 90% of our atoms get completely replaced by new ones through just the simple process of breathing, sweating, peeing, eating, snoring, yelling, singing, you know, existing. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's actually real. You can look it up. The atoms that make up the purple paint I'm working with here were once forged in the same stars that made the atoms that are inside Clarence's feet. It all carries over, and everything is recycled into one another, and it is all literally connected. Why try to hide it? So, you know, a little overspray is okay. Also, I feel like when I have to freehand a little area over and over again, it forces me to really focus in on the task. There's a heightened awareness that comes with freehanding that I just don't quite feel when I'm masking something. Again, it's all about what helps you to stay present, right? So if you get that same feeling by using a paint mask, then that's what you should do. You got to do what feels right for you. This is just how I like to do it. Now, occasionally when hand painting with vinyl paint, you see here, we will get a little thin skin that forms on the top of our paint. And around that time, the brush will also start to get a little tackier to work with. So we just have to occasionally remix the paint and clean out brush with a little thinner. And then get back to it, you know, with a fresh tip. Boop, boop, boop. Blip, blop, boop. Bop, beep, boop, bip, bop. Ta-da! Legs finished. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And last but not least, the mushroom hats. Time to hit those gills with some white. You know, I really like these tiny paint clamps I'm using. These were a recent addition to my toolkit. In the past, I've always just stuck my vinyl pieces on dowel rods, but if you don't have a perfect fit, the pieces can spin around on the dowel rods when you spray them. And that wasn't really an issue that I had to deal with a lot because most of my toys are bigger, heavier, so they don't spin as easy when you spray them. And also bigger pieces are a lot easier to just hold with my fingers, but Clarence is just so tiny. I knew I was going to need something to stabilize the pieces better when painting them. And these little alligator clip sticks have really done the trick. So the white has been applied to all the hats. And now it's time to bring in my favorite color, purple. I just love purple so much. I always have, ever since I was a little kid. It's a special color and kind of rare. You don't see it in nature a whole lot. But when you do, you know, it's always stunning. There's this quote from The Color Purple that I really love. I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it. So true, so true. That's a quote from Shug Avery. She was a really good character in that book. I especially appreciated her unconventional take on God. She refers to God as more of an omnipresent spirit that isn't so much concerned with us pleasing it, and rather it's always making an effort to please us. And us not noticing that, like us simply not stopping and noticing a little purple flower we walk by, is kind of a sin. And, you know, not in the whole grand sense of what people think of as sin, you know, but more so just an injustice to yourself, you know, because you're not really appreciating the rare beauties in life. So, yeah. So here's the Wonder Goblin challenge for you. Next time you walk by a purple flower, no matter how small, just stop what you're doing. Stand there and look at it for a moment and really appreciate it. It'll do something for you. Seriously. I think that's why I've always loved purple so much, because it's a color that always seems to draw my attention away from the noise of my mind. I can get lost in my thoughts real easily, but purple brings me into the present, and I really appreciate it for that. I think these hats might actually be my favorite part to paint out of this whole figure. I love painting these mushroom hats. There's just a really nice flow here. The way that just a simple quick directional spray of periwinkle just highlights the morel texture of the cap. It's just, mwah, so nice, you know? Okay, everything is painted. We just have to give it some time to cure before assembling. I like to give it a couple days. And you know, when you've done a lot of work like this, cooped up in a paint cave wearing a respirator for hours on end, there's nothing quite like giving yourself a little day off to just enjoy life. So we're going to take a short day trip to my favorite place in Callaway Gardens, the Butterfly House. This place is so cool. And it's not a butterfly zoo, okay? They're actually doing really great conservational work here. They actually buy their butterflies in the chrysalis stage from family-run butterfly farms in tropical countries that are pretty economically challenged. And those butterfly farms they purchase from are dependent on healthy, undisturbed natural ecosystems. So as these farms grow, their local economies grow, and it becomes necessary to protect the rainforest, right? So without this demand that Callaway Gardens places upon them, the alternative would be for the local residents to more than likely cut down the rainforest in search of other means to support their livelihood. So it's really wonderful what Callaway is doing. And if you live in Georgia or are ever visiting, I highly recommend you make a stop at this place. You won't be disappointed. You spend enough time with them, the butterflies literally will just land on you. It's really wonderful. They'll crawl up your shoe, they'll sit on your hand. Oh man, you know, you can just pick them up sometimes. And this blue morpho landed on my face. For a second, I thought he was interested in my sweet tasting sweat, but he just sat there on me for like a long time, not doing anything but occasionally flapping his wings. So yeah, I made a new friend. I even took him for a walk, and we looked at all the other beautiful sights, and what beautiful sights they were. And not just butterflies. The flowers here are whimsical, to say the least. I mean, look at that one. Looks like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. Or that one looks kind of like a bat face. And then my buddy and I meditated for a while. And then we had to say goodbye. Goodbye. Back to work. So now that our paint has had plenty of time to cure, we can start the assembly process. And since I designed Clarence to have doll eye inserts, we need to go ahead and drill the eye holes out. You can use a simple handheld drill, but we do a lot of doll eye inserts here at the Wonder Goblin factory, so we like to use this drill press when doing runs. It's a little easier to get into a good flow when using a drill press. And when you're a one-man assembly line, good flow is preferable. But you know, if you've never used a drill press before, be very careful when operating one in this matter. Again, presence. I'm going to keep drilling this into you. But seriously, all puns aside, you really do need to be totally and completely present when using a drill press the way I'm using it right now. Turn off the distractions, stay focused. You can very easily injure yourself in a big way with just one slip on this guy. It is fun though. And it's a lot quicker than using a handheld drill. You know me, I like taking my time when it comes to expressing myself creatively, but for these less creative parts of the process, you know, drilling eye holes, it's nice to save a little time. So y'all have stuck with me here for a while, so I'm going to give you a little treat. I'm going to tell you fine folks about the mystery of Clarence. What's his deal? Where's he come from? And why does he wear a purple cape? Well, once upon a time, long ago, before the dawn of man, there was a wondrous place here on planet Earth called Squatchland. It was a mossy wonderland inhabited by Sasquatches, Yetis, and other hairy, immortal beings. One of the most ancient and strangest of these beings was a little Rangshambambo, known only as Clarence. This whimsical fellow was unlike the other Squatchlanders, always speaking of himself in the third person and singing nonsensical songs. But his magical displays were loved by the youngsters, and his humorous musings were cherished by all. He was also known for his quick wizardly temper, and, well, of course, his abnormally inflated sense of self. You see, no one else besides Clarence in Squatchland really possessed that kind of egoic perspective, so he was definitely considered a curious oddity in that way. But of course, his partner and soulmate, Abba Zaba, who was very humble, loved Clarence for his unique ways, and the two together balanced each other out in a beautifully yin-yang kind of way. But it was Clarence, with his new and strange egoic perspectives, who first created the concept of fashion. He would find large magical mushrooms in the wild and dry them out and fabricate them into hats and pants. He would track down wild animals and domesticate them with magic, only to shear their fur so that he could fashion magnificent capes. When he first started doing this, all the other Squatchlanders thought him to be mad, totally ridiculous. But as Clarence's craft improved, his fashionable creations began to spread joy throughout the youngsters of the land, and it was he who actually influenced early humans with the desire to create in this frivolous but joyful manner. To this day, he still enjoys using his wizardly powers to secretly influence us creatively. So the next time you see a preposterous display of someone strutting down a catwalk wearing an oversized suit made of moss, you can thank Clarence, for he is the true father of fashion and virtuoso of Vogue. I hope you enjoyed that little whimsical backstory. All right, so we're ready to assemble. This is our little warming station. It's basically just a couple of 250-watt bulbs hanging from a metal stand that I stacked some kiln bricks around. And we've got the parts with the joint holes warming up. The parts containing the joint pegs, we want to keep at room temperature. Our safety eyes, our felt capes, our legs, arms, and hats. So depending on how thick your vinyl is, it can take anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes for these parts to soften up. We're going to start by inserting the eyes. And then while the head is still warm, we'll pop in the hats. Now there is a little trick to assembling SOFUBI. Eyes are pretty easy to insert as long as we used the right size bit when drilling the holes, which we did. But now assembling painted vinyl pieces, there's an angled twist and push action you got to perform to get things to set right. As you can see here, just a little twist, push. There's like an angle, boop, boop. You know, with this one, you can kind of see the vinyl is a little thick. Sometimes the vinyl you're working with is cooked at just the right thickness to where the joint sets perfectly and everything snaps in easy peasy. But sometimes the factories can cook their vinyl a little too thick. And with small pieces where every little millimeter makes a difference, that thicker vinyl can sometimes adversely affect how the joint sets. And you have to either really shove it in a little more firmly, or you might even have to heat up the vinyl a little hotter to get it to further soften up. For example, right here with this one, that's what's happening here with this arm. The torsos were cast a little too thick for how small they are, so we're going to heat things up by setting the pieces in a cardboard box to better trap the heat in there. And we'll move them up a little closer to the heat source too by pushing the box up on stilts. Walk away for another 10-20 minutes or so to wait for them to get hot and soft enough. But you got to be careful. If the surface of the vinyl gets too hot, the vinyl paint can become heat transferable, especially if you put too much pressure on the joints when assembling these super hot pieces. This can especially happen if you accidentally missed a spot when doing the initial solvent bath, which, remember, helps with the stronger chemical bond. So yeah, if the chemical bond is kind of weak in an area and then the vinyl gets too hot and then you use too much force when assembling, all three of those events can create this perfect storm for a heat transfer to occur. And what happens is the color kind of rubs off from one side and smears down the other side. But it's not a huge deal. You know, it just requires a little touch-up paint work, that's all. So assembling your own toys can be exciting, especially if it's the first release of a figure you're doing and you keep it at a manageable amount. I'm actually having fun putting these Clarences together, and that's because I'm not overdoing it. I think I'm doing a run of 23 here. If you're doing much larger runs, the assembly process can become physically taxing, especially if you're doing this kind of work a lot, back to back for extended periods of time, day after day, which I have done in the past, and I would advise against doing that to yourself if you can avoid it. I actually started experiencing chronic joint pain in my wrists a few years ago after an extended period of toy assembly work I had to do for a job. And to this day, the pain likes to pop up fairly often in order to remind me of the lesson I learned about why it's important not to overwork yourself. So, you know, these things happen when, you know, when you have the work ethic that I have. I like to work. Work to me is a lot like play because I make toys, you know, and so I can sometimes forget that I'm working and I just think I'm just having fun and playing. But, you know, my body will remind me, don't forget you're working. Take some time. Go do something else, you know, go walk the dogs, take a day off. Give your hands a break because, you know, everything I'm doing with my hands. I sculpt with my hands. I paint with my hands. I assemble these toys with my hands. I write up my stories with my hands. I'm constantly working with my fingers and my hands and my wrists every day, all day. I cook, you know, I clean. I do all these things with my hands. So we have to remember to give those hands a break, you know. Give them some time to recover. Because if you don't, you'll get that chronic pain. So here we are. Clarence! Look at all those beautiful babies. Oh, I like how these guys turned out. They're fun. So now it's time to do the QC, the quality control. Just gonna basically look through every single one. Just kind of give it a little once over. Make sure there's no paint rubs that I missed. No heat transfers like I talked about earlier. No little bits and bobs that are like glaringly obvious, you know. Little things, a little bit of overspray here and there, like I said, a little bit of spitter spatter there. And it adds the charm to it, It lets people know, like, this was handmade. Every little one is going to be a little different. They don't all have to look exactly the same. If the cape is a little off. Right there, though, see that? That's the heat transfer I was talking about. That head was too hot, and I put too much force on there, and I probably missed that spot when I was doing a solvent bath, and so that perfect storm happened. I twisted it on there, and that paint, heat transferred over to the other side. So it's not a big deal. We'll fix it. I'll set that one aside and do a little paint touch-up, a little bit of tangerine there and a little bit of white on there, and it'll be good as new. But the rest of these, they're all good. That was the only one. That's the only one that happened to. The rest of these guys are all good. So it's time to move on to the header cards. Now, I like to print on an Epson Eco Tank because I don't have to worry about ink cartridges being refilled. I just fill up the ink whenever it goes low. And then we're going to cut these header cards one at a time. I like to do one at a time so that I can make sure the cuts are exact. That's just me. I'm not very good at cutting, so I have to be careful and really pay attention to what I'm doing. And then I've got this little card folding contraption I like to use that puts a really nice perfect crease in the header. Really makes the process a lot easier and a lot cleaner looking. I don't think I paid too much for this thing. I found it online. It just has like a little measuring block at the left end. You can see where it butts up against. You just measure how many inches it is to the middle, and you set it there, and you just slide it in, and pa-clunk, pa-clunk. You just get into a groove. I kind of like this part. It's very, old school factory work. and this header card, I didn't put a lot of time into it. I made it up in a day just on Photoshop. Using some pictures I took of Clarence. And now it's time to put them in the bag. I like these little 2 mil poly bags because they're thick, but they're not too thick. You can still see through them pretty nicely. Zip it up, take the header card, slide it over the top. I got this fancy little stapler with a guard there to tell me where to stop, so I don't have to pay attention. I can just put it right up in there and know exactly where to snap it. Boom, boom. And there we have it. Clarence, the Clarence toy. Oh, he will be so pleased. Turned out nice. I like him. And don't forget to put your information on the back of the header card so that people know where to find you. And I'm going to take a page out of Clarence's book, and we're going to speed the last part of this process up with a little bit of magic. And then we're going to number the backs of the header cards, because I remember to do that, even though I'm tired. I don't always do that on larger runs. I know I say large run. This is a very small limited edition production run. I get that. But, for art toys, it's kind of large, I guess. I guess large for me is like 40 or 50. And small for me is like 5 or 6 or 7, 20s, 23s, middle of the road. I don't know why I landed on 23. I counted them up. I was like, oh, I got 23. That's it. And then, I gotta sign those. I almost forgot. I guess people might like that. I don't know. All right, we're gonna do that. They're all numbered and signed. And now we're gonna go show Clarence how much we love him. All right, Clarence, wakey, wakey. I got all your toys painted, bagged, tagged, and ready to go.
Well, sure took you long enough.
Yeah, I think it's my turn for nap time.
Night-night, Mr. Goblin. Well, there you have it. All you fine humans may now purchase a Clarence toy of your very own at wondergoblin.com. Except for this one. You can't have this one. So don't dilly-dally. Once they've sold out, they're gone forever.
Really, Clarence? Gone forever?
Yes, gone forever. Exclusivity, exclusivity.
Okay, take it away, baby James.
Blue Morpho. The laughing butterflies gather at midday, feeding upon the fruit, then ready to play, once again cackling at the infernal sun.
Purple, pinko, periwinkle, time for a little Clarence jingle. Listen now to the rain bomb, bimble, bumble, rumble song, glimmering in your brainy brine. The tune of Clarence rings and shines, moving you all to dance and play on this grimble, grumble day. Tra la 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 la, lo 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 lo. Listen now to the rain bomb, bimble, bumble, rumble song.